And I'm gonna go to Safari.
There you go.
There we go.
You.
Perfect.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's perfect. Great. Well, as Virginia said, I actually live in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, just across the bridge that you see here, and on my screen. And I'm a co-pastor with my husband in the Presbyterian Church, and have been interested in AI. I actually wrote a paper in college about AI, which I don't know because I don't know if I was assigned that topic or how I got there, but just interested in what computers can do and how we interact with computers and how they can help us and how to use computers responsibly. So, as I said, I've been a co-pastor with my husband for 35 years, and he also has been very interested in AI, and we both work part-time at a church, and then he is a co-founder at an AI startup that focuses primarily on AI and emotions, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We have been working on a book. Can you move to the next slide? Called Right Human, a field guide for creators in the age of AI. And that is coming. If you're interested in um, hearing about that or being a reader or just asking about that, I have my email at the end of the slide and would love to hear from you. I'm hoping that we can use the chat a little bit because I think some of our conversations will be really to get opinions and ideas out there. But just I can see the gallery of participants here. Raise your hand if you've ever used AI, like gone onto an app that is an AI app and you use it for various things. Raise your hand if that's okay. Um, Raise your hand if you have used AI for you have a symptom and you're thinking, what is this? I want to check a doctor or check. I don't want to call a doctor, but I want to find out about this. Raise your hand if that's. And now my hand is my little emoji keeps going up. Okay, I gotta figure out how to take my lower hand. Okay. Um, Raise your hand if you've used AI for preaching in some way or Bible study or something like that. Okay, so a few of you. Great, great. Well, I wanted to start our conversation first by looking at this quotation. This is from a chapter of the book that my husband and I are working on. And I wanted to just take a second to read it. I know the rule of thumb is that you're not supposed to have more than 7 words on a PowerPoint screen, but this is I'm not a graphic designer, and I'm not I don't do this PowerPoints typically, but I wanted to get this full quote out here and give everybody a minute to think about it, and then if you on the lower bar there's a chat um, option. If you have some response to that quote or question or a thought or a word or two that stands out, would you just write that in the chat so we can all see that and do it to everyone? Any thoughts or responses to that quote? Um, From Tracy, we appreciate the distinction. And I'm assuming that you're referring to machines generate and humans, right? Okay, I see a thumbs up there. Um, so we can, it's like going to the library, there's a million books there to read, but humans decide which one is going to be appropriate for this time, which one is fitting, which one do I want to read. So it, in some ways, it could be a parallel to that. Uh, any other reflections? Oops. Okay, so it's not so much that machines are taking over, but it's our choice to allow them. That we have some agency in deciding how are we going to allow this. There's a lot of I just even trying to keep up with all of the articles and reports on AI in preparation for this conversation today. There's all kinds of articles about AI. My son works for a tech company, and 20% of the workforce is they're saying is going to be replaced by um, AI. And so there's all kinds of fear of taking over, and what is it going to take over? How are we? Is it something that we can connect with, or is it just going to bulldoze over? Is there a role for our voice? Is there a place for human decisions? And so all these things are questions that come up, and they're questions that you need to, I think, have a foundational understanding of before you start engaging in AI. And I think it's really important. I got a email this morning. I'm sure you get emails all the time on these kind of things, but from the American Bible Society saying, today is the day we need pastors. I think every day, but today in particular, because we're not the only ones asking these questions. And we need to be helping our congregations and the people that we are in conversation with, just knowing how to sort out some of these questions and to have an opinion and a stance on that and to take a role of responsibility. So we'll get back to some of these issues, but that this brings up. But Virginia, can you move to the next slide? In our time today, I'm kind of assuming that some of you are interested and have no idea what AI is and wanted to show up and learn something. There's others of you that have been using it for a while, maybe want to know how to use it better. Maybe some of you use it for travel, for itineraries, for cooking, for medical guidance and things like that, but aren't quite sure how to use it responsibly for preaching. So I'm just going to demonstrate very briefly on a sermon that I did with my process in using AI for preaching, and then have a time towards the end for some of the bigger questions that I've identified some, but also maybe some that you all have and have a time for sharing. And maybe we could, at that point, stop sharing the screen and be able to see each other. Um, so, Virginia, can you move to the next slide? Then the next slide, I guess. So what is AI? Stands for artificial intelligence. And I'm going to go to the right column first to talk about what it actually is. AI is basically training machines to do things better and faster than humans can. Better and faster. The way that it does this, AI collects LLMs, which are large language models, and LLMs. They're different ones that we're going to talk about in a minute, but they basically rake all of human knowledge and harvest it and put it in a giant database. And so it is millions and millions and millions and millions of words. And then it starts to observe how humans are connecting those words. And so it is a giant connector predictor of when humans say this word, um, out of the 5 million sermons that we've collected, because we've gone through all your websites or looked at things that have been published and looked at art magazine articles, we can predict that when somebody says the word grace, these 4 words often follow, more often than not follow grace. And so it is able to predict the language that a human would use, and it does it in nanoseconds. It's stunning just how quickly it is able to put those words together. So now I'm going to move to the left column and say what AI is not. It is not a human, although we're going to see in a few minutes that it when there's a I want to say a voice, but when the words speak, when there's a conversation, it is a conversation partner, and it refers to itself as a human. So it kind of plays with your brain a little bit. So it will say, I think that's a great idea. And you can get lured into thinking that this is another human being because it uses personal language or personal pronouns. AI is not an entity with emotions. It has no ability to feel. It's like just a giant bucket of words. So it knows that when humans say things like happy or excited or distressed, that these are other words that follow. And so it is mimicking our human reactions. It is not someone with an opinion, although it is very opinionated. So it will say something like, that is a great idea. I think this is, you're very courageous to think about that. That's really thoughtful. That's very insightful. It feeds back these kinds of things. But again, it's really important to stay in the right column and realize it is a collection of words that predicts. It's not someone with experience. It's a bucket of words. So you are the person with experience when you come to AI. It does not have a moral compass. I think that's really important to say. And this is one of the reasons why so many states are trying to regulate in some way. It does not have a moral compass. So I happen to know of a parent whose child used AI to write a suicide letter and to plan a suicide. And it is taking the task and helping you accomplish that task. It does not have the ability to say, that's not a good idea, or that doesn't seem like a healthy next move. It doesn't, it is incapable of offering that kind of advice. So again, it is a large bucket of words that predicts. I heard somebody say, and I refer to her at the end of this time, it's neither artificial. You hear about these data centers going, being built in different places. It requires an extraordinary amount of energy. It requires information. It requires people to feed it information. It requires our creativity, our words, our writing in order to exist. And it is not intelligent. It is extraordinarily fast, and it is able to mimic the word connections that we have fed it, but it is not, by an identity intelligent. So just going to stop there for a minute. Are there there's 17 of us and we're sharing the screen, but does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts that you might want to put in the chat to address at this point? Okay. And why don't we move to the next slide? There's a couple questions on, or back to which AI. And you may use AI, you may be a frequent user. I just pulled up two of these that are probably the most common, and then one that I keep getting emails about. So I thought I'd just add this. Um, there's a couple main players, and these are like kind of open to the general public. Um, there are more specific, so I don't know about like Baptist preachers. I do know like psychologists might have their own large language model. There's certain like economic um, uh, large language models for various disciplines, for medicine, for economics, for policy, for things. So, but these are more like in general use. Um, they both primarily do much of the same thing. They've been in the news recently for maybe their use with the government. Claude is run by Anthropic and had um, uh, asked the government not to use its software for or its technology for because it was starting to use it for surveillance on private citizens, and Claude didn't like that. It said this was not the arrangement. This isn't who we are. Claude also, interestingly, has invited religious leaders to come and consult with their designers, their strategists, and they've also the Pope, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Just wrote a kind of a thesis, a paper on AI and faith, and Claude has invited the Pope to be a thought partner in this. So I know a couple people that have been invited to the Anthropic offices they want to have a religious sensibility and an understanding of language around faith. Chat GPT is one of I could be the original one. I'm not 100% sure. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which again kind of means nothing. Those are big words, but we observe these things and they roll off our tongue. It started as a nonprofit. Bernie Sanders wrote an article about this in the New York Times on June 1st, which I think is really interesting if you wanted to look at that. And I do have that in the bibliography. Just saying, like, this originally started as, hey, we all have thought, we all have writings, we all have things that we have created. What if we put it in a big bucket and use this as a generative creative tool for all of us to own? It was of the public domain. It's actually going into it's being taken private, or sorry, it's being taken as an IPO to the stock, is open to the stock market now. So it has moved very far from its nonprofit beginnings and is now a for profit, and it's being used for very different purposes than originally it was designed. Another thing that I just got this week that I haven't used, I haven't seen, but just as an example, Sermon AI 5 is the 5th version of this. I do know some people that have said that they've used it or dabbled with it. And this is just a big, giant bucket again of sermons that it's an AI large language model designed for preachers, people who are writing sermons and want to, it's basically like the internet or like a giant Google search for other sermons. I've not used that, but it came out this past week and I'm getting pressed hard to try it with their publicity. Any thoughts, questions on this? Okay, let's move to the next slide. So my graphics are a little off here, but that's okay. There's a whole continuum on ways that AI is used by preachers, and there's a continuum. I happen to have an opinion on how I think is a more responsible, effective, faithful way to use AI for preaching, but I'm just going to put this out there. So at one end of the continuum, preacher writes a sermon and then puts it into AI to say, is there any way you could polish the transitions? I know particularly people that English is not their first language use this in this form. Remember that when you put your sermon into an AI and say, can you polish this, or make sure my transitions or my nouns and verbs match, you are putting your words into the large language model, so you are contributing to humanity's access to words and predictions and things. So that's one end of this continuum, where you write it, you do it, and then you just put it in there to see, like, is there anything I'm missing here? Um, Kind of more towards the middle, you ask AI for ideas. You might say, I've got the beginning, I've got the end, or I've got the middle. I know the body of what I want to do. I need a good intro or an outro, or, I feel like I have the theology of this. I have my talking points, but I would like a richer description of what life might be like for this Galilean and who met somebody on the road. And can you help me describe that? And so maybe like you might take a chunk, or you might ask a specific question and then incorporate that into your sermon. Then there's at the other end of the spectrum is you just say, can you write a sermon for me on blah? And then you look at it and then just tweak it for what you what you think might be more appropriate for your setting. So that's kind of the wide range of how AI is used by preachers, and I suspect all of us could find ourselves somewhere on that in that continuum. Virginia, can you move to the next slide? So I know that you have an assignment to preach on a woman in the Bible, and I had preached a sermon that I really liked last summer on the widow of Zarephath, and I did not use AI for this sermon, but I thought I kind of reconstructed it using AI, and I thought I would just demonstrate how that is used if you've not ever used AI for a sermon, and then maybe look at some of the strengths and some of the short callings of using AI, and how to maybe do it a little better than what I did here. First of all, I just want to say, like, I love that picture of her. I think that's just a beautiful. I found this. It's very hard to find any kind of representation. She didn't capture the imagination of many medieval artists or Renaissance artists, but I've always loved this picture of Widow of Zarephath. That was not AI generated. That's from Samantha Long. So, Virginia, we'll go to the next slide. So this is what the screen looks like. I'm using Chat GPT here. And by the way, I didn't say you can get. Most of these are still free. Um, you can get it, like, I think Chat GPT is free, and you can ask up to 5 questions a day, and then you're done. Then you can start the next day. I have a $20 a month subscription, and I think Claude is $20 a month too. And I don't know what Sermon AI 5 is, but so anyway, this is Claude. I mean, Chat GPT. So it knows me a little bit because I've asked it other questions. I use it sometimes, like I'll write a newsletter article and then I might put it in there and say, are there things that I should be saying better, or is there a better way to articulate this? So anyway, it's just, this is the opening screen, and it says, what are you working on? And so I said, can you write a sermon for me on the widow of Zarephath? And I misspelled it, but it still knew what I was talking about. So we can move to the next screen. So this is the first, I just took a screenshot of the first, at the beginning of it. So why don't you take a look at this and write in the chat if you have any observations or what your thoughts are on this. So could you preach this is it something that could be heard in your congregation? Any thoughts, responses to this first page? It's not bad, right? It's pretty fluid. Um, Virginia, could you move to the next? So I didn't include the whole sermon here, but I want you to see at the bottom, it says this version will land about 12 to 15 minutes. So it just wrote, and I didn't read the whole thing, but it wrote a sermon that could be delivered, 12 to 15-minute long sermon, probably in seconds. It wrote this. So then at the bottom it says, if you'd like me to create a vision that more explicitly connects widow's courage, so it's taking that, probably most people that preach on the widow of Zarephath have talked about courage because it's coming up with courage. But I'd like to link that to my congregation's ministry. So it knows a little bit about my congregation. It's reminding me we have a justice garden and we have a farm stand, community generosity, your church in Marin. It could make it more local and concrete, or it's promising to do that, or it is offering to do that, I should say. So this is a little bit of the decision piece, right? Where we have to say, well, it's a little bit creepy too. It's like, wow, does it actually know me? Does it know my congregation? Does it know what like in some ways it might be a little tempting to say, well, what would you say? What do you know about me? But always remember that you're the one that actually lives with these people and you know the people that you're preaching to, or you know the reason they've asked you to come preach um, in their congregation. You know more about them than AI does. So let's move to the next slide. So I just gave that to you as an example of like if you said, could you write a sermon for me? Yes, it can. Is it going to be the right sermon for your congregation? I would say no. Um, would it be good enough? Probably. Would it have things that you hadn't thought of? Likely. Would it be the right message for your congregation? And that is where you need to make these kind of decisions. Might it have a good section? Probably. So one of the things that I like to do with chat when I start to think about a sermon is to ask it to help me think of a sermon title. Some traditions have sermon titles, some don't. I kind of like to do this just to get my mind going and then maybe things that I haven't thought about. Let me just back up and say too, before I do this, before I ever go to chat or anything, I have read the scripture, I've meditated on the scripture, I've prayed about it, I've consulted other books, commentaries, maybe even some of my favorite preachers. I look to see how did you use this. I always, I'm coming to this process with that work behind me. So when we talk about the decision making, um, the need for the pastor to be the decision maker and the information, the words, the predictions that are coming before us, that work has been done before I come to the screen. I'm always kind of curious what it does with a sermon title because it often is more creative than I am in this area. Um, so um, so one of the things here, and we'll just look at so I sent the prompt, can you help me think of sermon title? And so it says, absolutely. So it's always very enthusiastic and you feel like if you're ever feeling down about things, chat will just cheer you up. If you're preaching from the widow's perspective, especially emphasizing her role as a mother, caregiver, and overlooked woman, I didn't say that, but it's suggesting that a title can help shift attention away from Elijah and toward her courage and faith. So I didn't say those things. I didn't give that prompt. But so here's some titles. And interestingly, here, I none of these really struck me. So, there's times where, it may or may not be a help. You may have a much better idea. There's many times, and you have to trust that can happen. Virginia, can you move to the next slide? So so I thought, and this is really important, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. I thought, I need to give it a better, what they call prompt. I've studied this scripture a little bit. I have a Wednesday morning Bible study. I've been thinking about how I want to preach this sermon. So I'm going to fill out my prompt a little more, not just say, can you write me a sermon? Because it already did that. So I'm thinking about writing a sermon from the perspective of the woman who is overlooked by society, but has the responsibility to care for her child. Can you give me ideas on what the widow of Zarephath might be thinking and worried about? So that's a little bit of a window, maybe to the inside of who she is. Is it right? No, this is an imagination exercise, but it might stir some ideas in me about how what she might be thinking about. Who is Elijah, and what would it like to be knowing that you probably have your last meal? What kind of emotions might what kind of creative writing might happen around that? So just again, to look at the response, I think it's a rich response. So first of all, AI is responding in which is seductive, I think. I think it's a rich approach, especially because the text often gets preached from Elijah's perspective. The widow's perspective allows you to explore what it feels like to carry an enormous responsibility while possessing very little power. And then it moves on, and I'm not including this. But as I was looking at that, I thought, when I preach, I can look out and I know there's about 8 widows in my congregation that will very likely be here this day. And so they're going to perk up, I think, with the word widow. That's a word that's very specifically applied. And how are they going to hear this? So I asked myself that. And do they see themselves possessing very little power? And the answer for the widows in my sanctuary would be no. These are very powerful women with a lot of agency. And our church would be a very different place without them. And they make a lot happen. So I sat back and thought, I don't like where this is going. So can you move to the next screen, Virginia? So I thought, I'm going to ask it. Can you write an outline? I don't want a sermon. I want an outline of that sees a widow as a woman with agency, a woman with responsibilities and a plan, a woman who both God and Elijah knew he needed to survive. So if Elijah knew that he needed this woman to survive, God knew that Elijah needed this woman to survive. And then I happened that week to have been at a bookstore and I've been watching Bridgerton. And I just love all the crazy fabulous women in Bridgerton. And so I happened to pick up a book by Shonda Rhimes, who is the director and creator of Bridgerton. And she talked about a year of yes, how she just figured out how to say no to everything because she was working and wanted to do all these fabulous things on screen. And so her sisters confronted her and just said, like, you never say yes to anything. And so she committed to doing a year of yes on a whole level of things. So I thought, what if the like that was, I just happened to pick up that book. So what if I decided to weave Shonda Rhimes in there for the year of yes? And just like what happens when we say yes? Now, there's no way in the world that AI would have come up with that on its own. That was from me studying the scripture, me studying my congregation, me being at a bookstore that week, me listening or watching Bridgerton. Um, so I was able to ask it a very specific question. Um, and I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to use it to write some of it. I wasn't, I had my ideas already. I kind of had that in place. But let's go to the next slide. So I asked it to write an outline for me just to see, where would you go with this? And it was from here that I started to, as I said, I wrote the sermon last summer, but I started to build the sermon, reworking the sermon off of this outline. I think that is the end of the and AI can't help but add comments on things. So at the end it says the widow thought she was preparing for an ending, but God saw the beginning and something new. Something the miracle begins not with abundance. Sometimes the miracle begins not with abundance, but in saying yes. And um, so this was a little bit of my process on constructing kind of the pillars or the structure, the outline for this sermon. Some things that I wouldn't recommend doing, some things that I do recommend doing, some things that I just try and probe. And so I just wanted to demonstrate with you some of the ways in which AI can help and not help, and where your voice as a preacher, as one who exegetes scripture, one who has a sense of what the message is that you think is appropriate for your congregation that day. For those of you who exegete your congregation, these are really important, essential tools to use for AI. I'm going to stop there before we move into some of the bigger questions. Are there any thoughts, questions, observations on any of that we've just looked at?
Lynn, I think for me, one thing that you just highlighted was that if you're hoping to preach directly from a manuscript, I liked that Jennifer Brown said it sounded bland. There is something that sounds so AI about some, and I think that's kind of funny too, that we as humans are getting good at identifying what AI is. Like you'll read an article and you're like, I don't think the author wrote this paragraph, and so I'm curious, and this is just a throw out there. I mean, I'm curious how we're morphing too into more intuitive beings. But I think what you've highlighted for me is the first round was identifiably AI and bland, Jennifer's word. But here with just, but unfortunately, I was a manuscript preacher when I was a preacher. And when I preach, I still want a manuscript. So I'm trying to write it in a way that does acknowledge who my audience is. It's storytelling and I try to be engaging, but it looks like here, did you just preach from from these notes here that gave you cues and you just talked, or did you manuscript preach.
No, I'm a manuscript preacher.
Yeah.
I was just curious if I could break it down to the essentials where it saw the movement, like the pivot
Right.
points in the sermon, because I didn't want it to kind of to your point. And I think it's very alluring. And this is again where at the beginning, the slide, it's not so much that AI will replace us, it's that we're letting AI replace our humanity. So we think, oh, that prose, it's so smooth. It sounds it sounds silky, like it sounds eloquent, but it's bland, and you're missing the heart of it sometimes. Sometimes it's just really good and you think, okay, I could have never come up with that sentence, but it doesn't. And this is why I didn't want it. I wanted to start with an outline, and because I wanted to create the different sections myself, and I already kind of had an idea of how to do that. But I think it's really important. It will always make you sound better, more eloquent, but it might not make you sound like you. I mean, it won't make you sound like you. So you need to. That's why I didn't want that. I just asked for a structure here, but yeah, you have to. And the bland quotient is important to look for, because it will put words together that sounds good, but it might not be good. It might not say anything. Any other thoughts on the sermon process itself? Okay, let's move to the next slide. And here, and maybe the next one. One of the things that I hope I was able to show you a little bit is just how important the prompt is. Because you can say, "Would you write me a sermon?" And it will, but you don't necessarily. That may not be. It won't represent any work that you've put into it, or any connections that you've made, or do you want the widow to be somebody that is poor and doesn't have any agency, has no more choices to make in her life? Or do you want her to maybe pick up some of the characteristics of the people that you have in your congregation? So the prompt is absolutely essential. So I'm just going to have a few here that I came up with, and you might have better ones. I'm sure you have better ones. Sometimes I might say, could you give me 5 options to think about what Elijah and the widow of Zarephath talked about? Or can you help me think about 5 things that 5 reasons why she wouldn't help him? And some of these things you could come up with on your own, but I'm just kind of spitballing, just trying to get like a deeper, more thoughtful, helpful prompt. Sometimes I might say, can you describe what life might have been like for the widow of Zarephath? And no one knows, so you have to decide, is this actually useful or not? How would you develop a sermon from the perspective of the widow? You could also ask the same for Elijah. And then, like I did, could you fold in an idea about saying yes with Shonda Rhimes? It didn't really know how to do that. So sometimes it's just like, if it doesn't have the words to do that, it can't do that. So let's move to the next screen. So here's a few questions that I've come up with, and you likely have your own about AI and preaching. And one of the big ones is, does or can or should AI take away the struggle preachers, I would say, need to have with the text? It can easily do that. and there's a temptation there, I think, to say, wow, I didn't have time to do the Bible study this week. I didn't have time to really look at this and see what is resonating, or what is just what's under my skin about this text. That there's nothing under AI's skin. It's just going to write words for you. So um, is AI can take that away from, and I would argue that that would not be faithful or effective preaching. If AI can write the sermon, what is it uniquely that the preacher can or should bring to the sermon? These are questions for all of us to reflect upon. What does AI tell us about ourselves and what it means to be human? If AI's goal is efficiency, is that the goal of the preacher? And then, do people want to hear a sermon AI wrote for you? There are other questions around AI and preaching. Does anybody have one that they might want to share, either aloud or in the chat?
I
I
have,
think I
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think my questions come before these questions. And so I think these questions assume use of AI. And I think what frustrates me about the conversation right now is it feels like the conversation around AI is like get on the train and use it or get left behind instead of should we be boarding this train? And so I'm concerned about the environmental impact, the fact that data centers are being built in communities that are poor and mostly brown and black, the fact that right now, other than Claude, there's no ethics being built into any of them. The racial prejudices are getting echoed even higher. The way that AI is now being used in policing, like everyone had that freak out over the Ring ad, right? During the Super Bowl, like we remember that, where it was like, oh, look, they found a lost dog. But then it's like, wait, is that really the purpose when they're selling it to ICE? And so, like, I want to have the conversation before this conversation of like, this is helpful. It's like, yes, ask specific prompts, but I'm like, should we do that at all? Is where I'm at.
That's great. That's a great question. And I think it's totally fine not to use AI. I just think that uh, I have actually well, the Pope comes out and says, I don't know if you care about what the Pope says, but I thought it was pretty interesting when he wrote this. And it's about our humanity and saving our humanity. But he basically says, like, you're not going to get away with not using AI because it's everywhere and it's influencing things. But we need to be able to say if and how we're going to use it for different parts of our lives. So I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think it's totally fine to say I'm not going to use AI for preaching. And I think all the environmental dangers. If we move to the next slide. There's some cautions around AI that I think are very important, and you raised one of them, that it has a cultural bias because it's reflecting what we're saying. And so that absolutely needs to be checked. And are we just, if you say, okay, I'm going to use AI, are you just putting yourself in a minefield that you don't need to be in? And I think, some of your question is that, like, I don't think it's necessary to use AI. If people want to, I think there's ways to use it responsibly, but it's one has to be vigilant. And I think it's also totally fine to say, I'm just not putting myself or my congregation in that situation. Somebody else had Was that you, Virginia?
I did have a question about, credit. I mean, how does that work? Well, like, I mean, especially if you say, "Hey, AI, write me a sermon." I mean, to who gets
Yeah.
credit for that? I mean, like, I don't know. I'm pretty particular about if I use a quote from Barbara Brown Taylor, I'm going to say Barbara Brown
Mhm.
Taylor writes, blah
For
blah
sure.
blah.
For sure. And this is a big issue with it. And interestingly, with there's been a lot of studies. The Harvard Business School has come out with like workplace satisfaction and job satisfaction. And there's definitely a sense of, did I do this? Was it me that wrote this? Um, and so there is a sense of, that's why to be honest, I like to just use it for little clumps of things. Like I kind of generally know where my sermon's going to go, and I have the outline, or I might say, can you help me describe the scene or something like that. But I think, to your point, it's like there's a big question behind who wrote it. And um, Bernie Sanders in this article, he thinks that the he's wanting to create a lawsuit against Chat GPT, and just saying that this is our data that you are using um, to make money, to profit upon, and you're profiting on our resources that we're giving you. And so he likens it to like the state of Alaska, where every citizen gets benefits when sales of their natural resources, which also is a whole other issue, but because those resources belong to the people of Alaska, and if somebody's going to make profit off of selling those, then the people of Alaska should get part of that. So he uses that as a Lycan model, saying, we're the ones that have given AI the content, so it belongs to the people, and so any profit should be shared by the people. I love Bernie Sanders when he's just able to help us think about those kind of things. But you're right. I will say, just looking at cautions here, I don't think it necessarily, well, so my husband he wanted to talk about a sermon using Bono. And he said, like, can you help me find this quote about da 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 that he remembered reading Bono said. So he put that in, and so it came up with like 5 quotes, and he said, and Mark wrote back, he said, I don't think this is what Bono said. And it got the response. He's saying, you're right, I just made that up. So this is again why, it's, if you want to quote somebody, you should have the quote, you should have the book, you should have the book or the article or whatever. And it's I don't think it will actually, but I don't know, I could be wrong. I don't know everything about this. I don't think it would take I don't know. That's a really good question, because I think it would attribute somebody, but it's collecting words. So the whole, like Bernie Sanders says, the whole thing's plagiarism because it's somebody else's. But it will never come up in the same way, the same word connections twice. It's always different. So you can't replicate what you did there. It'll always just mix things up in a different way.
Huh.
Again, just looking at the cautions here, it is not a person, doesn't have emotional or moral capacity. It is a predictive machine. It has no sense of what's truthful. It can hallucinate what they say. So it can say Bono said this, but didn't. It has a cultural bias because it has been fed particular cultural materials, and it's not. I think Anthropic is trying to be more inclusive of different cultures, but the language model that we have is not, or it has its limitations. AI doesn't know the people in the pews that you are preaching to. And so I think it's really, really important to, if you are going to use AI, that you're the gatekeeper with that and that you know the people that you're preaching to. I also think it's totally fine not to use AI, as you brought up, Jennifer. Yeah. We have 1 minute. I wanted to go, yeah, those are the conclusions, which I'll send these slides to you. I just wanted to go to the suggested resources, these are just a few, and I think I don't have, you know what, I think I'll add the Bernie Sanders article because I referred to this a couple times before I give it to you to send out, Virginia. The Pope actually has quite a few important things to say about what it means to be human and how to use AI. I thought this was a really excellent sermon on day one about AI and being human. There's a YouTube video that I think is really helpful by Allison Gerber, who is a homiletics candidate and a PhD candidate at Baylor. And then AIandfaith.org is a really great nonprofit organization that resource of all kinds of information to help out with this. So